Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 Patch 8 tier list and guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be looking at the new Patch 8 subclasses and their potential for multiclassing. I've already gone over and rated all of these new subclasses as monoclass characters, with all 12 levels taken in a single class, to get a sense of how powerful the new subclasses are. But of course, monoclass characters only tell part of the story. Taking 12 levels in one class is only a tiny percentage of the possible builds you can do, and so in order to see these characters' potential when played in Baldur's Gate 3, we need to look at how well they multiclass with other characters. So what we're going to be doing is looking at the most interesting abilities from each of these 12 classes, the ones that would draw you to multiclass into this class to get something cool, and how well they synergize with other classes. I'll also talk about common breakpoints for entering and leaving these classes, so you have a good idea of how many levels it requires to get the coolest things, and classes that they particularly synergize with. Obviously, I won't be covering every possible build with each of these subclasses, that's what the build guides are for, but this should give you a solid basis for planning your character around the new subclasses in Patch 8. Before I begin, I do want to say a quick thank you to Wascal Wabbitable for the $20 donation, and a very special thank you to Sarah, Hagen Kutlu Hachioglu, and Peter Brand, who've now been channel members for more than 1 year. I'm sorry that I actually missed those anniversaries. YouTube doesn't notify you when someone renews their membership, so I'm tracking these manually, but I really appreciate the consistent support. That's an incredible amount of time. Thank you so much. I should talk a little bit about how I'm going to rate these characters for multiclassing. So there's 3 things that are important in how well a class multiclasses. Firstly, how powerful are its class abilities, especially what I'm going to call its signpost class abilities, which draw you to take levels in that class, either by being build defining in and of themselves, or by being a huge bonus to any number of existing builds. A good example of a signpost ability is something like Thief Rogue's additional bonus action. This will, by itself, enable a whole variety of strategies and also complement a ton of additional other strategies. So it's an ability that you really want to take levels in Thief Rogue in order to get. The second is how synergistic are those abilities. Obviously, a character that has very self-contained abilities, very linear abilities that require you to take a lot of levels in that class in order to get the most use out of them, is not going to multiclass as well as a character that doesn't. A linear ability could be something like Beastmaster Ranger, which needs to keep taking levels in Beastmaster Ranger because other classes' abilities mostly don't work with the beast, so in order to improve that beast, you just need to keep taking more levels in Beastmaster Ranger. So, while it's a powerful ability, it doesn't synergize much with other classes. And finally, how early do you get the abilities? An ability you get at level 1 is obviously much less of an investment than an ability you get much later on, at level 7 or 8 or so. So the earlier a class's major power spikes and breakpoints come in, the better it's going to multiclass. So those are the 3 things that we're going to be keeping an eye out for as we rate these characters. And finally, let's define the tiers. In S+ tier, I'm placing subclasses that just give you way too much for very minimal investment, to the point where almost any character is made stronger by multiclassing with this class. I'll give you 3 guesses which subclass is going to show up in S+ tier. An example of this from prior to Patch 8 would be Light Cleric, which not only gives you all of the incredible things that you get from one level of Cleric, with weapon and armor proficiencies, amazing spellcasting and support abilities, excellent cantrips, and so on, but also gives you one of the best defensive abilities in the game, Warding Flare, usable without spending any resources. So there's very few characters that don't benefit from a level of Light Cleric, just vastly improving their survivability. In S tier, characters that have both incredibly powerful and incredibly versatile multiclassing options. An example of this would be Battlemaster Fighter. There are hundreds and hundreds of possible builds with Battlemaster Fighter. Anywhere from 1 to 11 levels can be part of an amazing multiclass build, so any character that provides excellent utility, synergizes with tons of different possible builds, is going to go in S tier. In A tier, characters that multiclass extremely well, but mostly to gain new options or lateral shifts to their power level rather than raw increases. A good example of this is Wildheart Barbarian, which can be used to enable entirely new builds or emphasize something completely different about an existing build, but is rarely going to just wildly increase the raw power level of a build. Incidentally, A tier is once again the perfect tier. If the balance team has done their job very well, then most subclasses should fall into A tier, where they enable build creativity, but not raw munchkinhood. In B tier, characters that have a few powerful multi-class builds they can do, but are usually going to be seen as single-class characters. Now, this doesn't mean that these are weak subclasses, just that a lot of them have linear abilities that don't play well with others, or only multi-class in very specific ways. A good example of this would be Moon Druid, which has a couple really powerful multi-classes that it can do, but for the most part is better off just taking more levels of Moon Druid to increase the power of its wild shape forms. And finally, in C tier, characters that get weak enough or situational enough abilities at early levels that they just don't make sense as part of most multi-classing builds, because taking them will just reduce your optionality and power level compared to taking more levels in a different subclass. A good example of this is Hunter Ranger, which gets its first real ability at level 11, so taking levels in Hunter Ranger and multi-classing it with something else mostly doesn't make sense. You'd either rather play a monoclass Hunter Ranger or not take levels in it at all. Again, doesn't mean that the subclass is necessarily weak, just that it doesn't make sense as part of a multi-class build. So let's begin talking about multi-classing with Giant Barbarian. Once again, I'm going to hop over to the wiki so we can all be on the same page when we are looking at this character's abilities, and we'll talk about breakpoints, synergies, and everything with various abilities for Giant Barbarian. So right away, Giant Barbarian is at a disadvantage for multiclassing because it's a subclass that shows up at level 3. And any subclass that doesn't show up until level 3 requires a lot more investment to use its abilities than a subclass that shows up at level 1. That's part of why sorcerers and clerics make such excellent one-level dips, because they get not only their class abilities, but also their subclass abilities at first level. Giant Barbarian needs to wait until level 3, so we just have a higher threshold for how good these abilities are to make us want to take them. Firstly, we get Giant's Rage, which doubles our damage on thrown attacks, and then 2 irrelevant abilities. Doubles our rage damage on thrown attacks, and then 2 irrelevant abilities. Double rage damage on throw attacks by itself is not a massive draw, and of course conflicts as well with Berserker Barbarian, which gets the extra bonus action throw at 3rd level, so usually you're not going to want only 3 or 4 levels of Giant Barbarian in order to multiclass with, because if you were going to do that, you would just take Berserker Barbarian to get the bonus action throw, which is more powerful for throwing weapon builds. So that means we're investing at least 5 levels before we get a real ability in Giant Barbarian. So it's not really a dipping class, one that you can take in order to make other builds more powerful, but instead is going to be the core of most builds that it's part of. Because of that, we are usually going to go to level 5 for extra attack and Boot of the Giants, which gives us a bonus action attack, and of course extra attack is always a great breakpoint. Level 6 for Elemental Cleaver, or level 7 or 8, because again, with Barbarian, 8 levels of Barbarian gets you Feral Instinct for bonus initiative, as well as a second feat. Once you've gone to level 5, there's very little reason not to go to level 6, because you aren't taking Giant Barbarian unless you're building a throwing weapon character. So, getting the Elemental Cleaver is probably what you're here for. That means that our normal breakpoints for Giant's Barbarian are going to be level 6, 7, 8, or 10, because level 10 gets us Mighty Impel, which is an extra bonus action throw. At level 10, there's probably only one multi-class build that you're going to do with that, which is 2 levels of Fighter to get Action Surge, and then Mighty Impel, and just be a powerful throwing weapon character. Level 6, 7, and 8, there's a lot of different options that you can take in order to boost the power of the character significantly, while getting the ability to use every weapon as a throwing and returning weapon, and also just a ton of additional damage. You also get more rages, you get the bonus initiative from being a barbarian, you can get a second feat at level 8, so there's a lot of different cool things that you can get at these sort of mid-level splits with Giant's Barbarian. I think most multi-classing builds with Giant Barbarian are either going to be 8 or 10 levels. That's typical for barbarians. Barbarians typically stop at level 8, but Giant Barbarian will often want to go to 10 because you actually get a good ability at level 10, unlike most other Barbarian subclasses. So you're going to see a lot of 8-4 splits and a lot of 10-2 splits with this character. So the real question is, how good are those 8-4 or 10-2 splits? And the answer is awesome. Giant Barbarian makes a great addition to any throwing weapon character. Obviously does have a little bit of competition with Berserker Barbarian, but Giant Barbarian lets you use any weapon as your thrown weapon and do all sorts of really cool stuff when combined with other characters. 4 levels in Thief Rogue to enable raging and using Boot of the Giants in the same turn, or multiple boots in later turns of combat. 2 levels of Fighter, or 4 levels of Fighter get you Action Surge and a bunch of other proficiencies and awesome abilities, as Fighter always does. Increased critical hit chance from Champion Fighter is also not irrelevant. And Shield from Eldritch Knight can be very good as well, because that can be used while raging. There's so many different cool things you can do, so although your signpost abilities come pretty late, and therefore the variety of possible level splits isn't that high with Giant Barbarian, and of course the character is somewhat pigeonholed into doing thrown weapon attacks, you can emphasize a lot of different things about what thrown weapon attacks you're doing by taking different levels of other classes. There's also some other cool niche abilities that you can do with lower level splits, just taking the Enlarge from Giant's Rage for builds that care about their character size. Keep an eye out for a build guide on this theme from me coming pretty shortly, probably. And so in addition to the normal splits that just give you really powerful additional effects and let you do different cool things with the character, there's also some niche abilities that you can have. For that reason, we are going to be giving Giant Barbarian A tier. And I think that this is a solid multi-class with a lot of different directions that it can go, gives you a lot of really powerful abilities when it does. Of course, can be taken monoclass and be excellent, as I mentioned in my monoclass tier list, but with multi-classing opens up a bunch of options, and all of those options are good. Next up, Glamour Bard. So I've said that I think that the general community consensus on Glamour Bard is very wrong. There's a lot of people who are saying this is an extremely weak subclass, and that's not true. It's actually a very strong subclass. I go into quite a bit more detail on this in my single class characters tier list for patch 8. However, there is one very valid criticism of Glamour Bard, which is that it's a very greedy subclass, requiring a lot of investment to get the most out of its abilities. Let's take a look at those, and I'll talk about what I mean. So firstly, just like Giant Barbarian, College of Glamour Bard can't be taken until level 3, because that's when bards get their subclass. So that level of investment, or investment in levels, limits the number of multi-class builds that want to take Glamour Bard at all. That means that most of the time, College of Glamour multiclasses are going to be more based around being a Glamour Bard that's taken levels of something else to improve being a Glamour Bard, than around improving something else with levels of Glamour Bard. Similar to Giant Barbarian, this is always going to be the core of a build, rather than something that boosts the power level of another build. At level 3, you get the ability Mantle of Inspiration, which is a pretty nice ability when you first get it. 10 temp HP at level 3 is very relevant, and the charm attacks at level 3, you're probably going to be being hit by some attacks at this level, because it's pretty hard to avoid, so the charmed effect can be very disruptive to enemy attacks, especially if those enemies attack multiple times in a turn. Mantle of Inspiration can really help keep your party alive. It's certainly not the most powerful thing available at level 3, but it's not bad. But it doesn't scale unless you take more levels of Glamour Bard. This ability, which is fine at level 3, if you still only have 3 levels of Glamour Bard by the time you're level 6, is an awful lot worse. It's on a long rest cooldown, the 10 temp HP certainly has not kept up with the incoming amount of damage. Only being able to target 2 party members with it is really bad. So in order to get the most out of Mantle of Inspiration, you really want to level up. And it only levels up, you really want to scale it, and it only scales by taking more levels of Glamour Bard. It gets improved at level 6 and at level 10 to target an additional creature and do 3 more temporary hit points at each level. So if you get it to level 6, not only are you getting an additional target and more HP at every use of this, you also now have the Font of Inspiration ability, which you get at level 5, so your inspiration dice come back on a short rest instead of a long rest, meaning many more uses of this ability. So it has scaled significantly with 6 levels of Glamour Bard. That means that pretty much any build that wants to multiclass with Glamour Bard is priced into taking at least 6 levels to get Mantle of Inspiration usable with a short rest cooldown ability and on 3 party members, and to get Mantle of Majesty Command, which is one of the big payoffs for Mantle of Inspiration and an extremely powerful ability. I'll talk about that in a second. But for the most part, your minimum breakpoint with Glamour Bard is going to be at least level 6, sort of similar to Giant Barbarian, but even more so, where without taking 6 levels in this subclass, you just haven't gotten the thing that makes the subclass good. After level 6, things open up a little bit more. Now that you've improved Mantle of Inspiration and gotten access to Mantle of Majesty Command, you have both a much more powerful version of Mantle of Inspiration and just a fight-winning ability in the form of Mantle of Majesty. Mantle of Majesty obviously is only once per long rest, but enables your whole party to spend way less resources in one fight per day because the Bard can just solo that fight by removing the most dangerous enemy from that fight pretty much automatically. Enemies who melee attack your allies are charmed without a saving throw, and then they're commanded without a saving throw turn after turn as a bonus action, so you can just win any fight against single powerful enemies using this ability. Very powerful feature to move into. So after level 6, you've now gotten the core loop of the character online. That being said, it's not clear that there's a lot of builds that benefit from 6 levels of Glamour Bard that don't just then benefit from going to 10 levels of Glamour Bard so that you can inspire your entire party and gain a lot more in the way of temp HP and damage mitigation from all the charms and disruption that causes to enemies, as well as magical secrets that you get at level 10 or 6th level spell slots that you get access to at level 11. That means that there are generally going to be only a few specific ways that you want to multi-class with Glamour Bard. Either 2 levels in something like Fighter, because Fighter's always good to take a 2-level dip in, or Warlock in order to get Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast, have Darkness synergy if you have other Darkness stuff in your party, and just have a better default combat action, or 2 levels of Paladin in order to be making damaging attacks with your spell slots, which just gives you something really good to do while you're concentrating on Mantle of Majesty. Or 4 levels, or taking 6 levels, and then taking something that boosts Mantle of Majesty, most notably Thief Rogue, which can let you activate it twice in one turn. You can see my build guide, The Glamour Commander, for a more detailed exploration of that build, which can use Mantle of Majesty to double command enemies once per long rest, vastly improving the power level of that build in that fight. Now, that's a very specific build, so College of Glamour Bard mostly is going to be looking for minor level dips in very efficient levels in other classes. 1 level of Wizard, 1 level for Wizard spellcasting, 1 level of Warlock for Eldritch Blast and Command as a spell known, 1 level of Sorcerer for Shield and all of the Sorcerer goodies and better combat cantrips, that kind of thing are going to be your typical picks on College of Glamour Bard, rather than being a more open multi-class with a lot of different ways to build the character. For that reason, we are going to give College of Glamour Bard B tier. It still has a lot of specific multi-class builds that are very strong. The ones that I mentioned, like 4 levels of Thief Rogue, or the 1-level dips in very powerful classes, 1 or 2 level dips in very powerful classes that synergize with what it's doing. But most of the time, these are going to be sort of narrow and specific builds, and it's not entirely clear that they're better than just more levels of Glamour Bard most of the time. So you can multi-class with Glamour Bard effectively, but usually you're just going to want to take 12 levels in it if you're doing Glamour Bard. Death Cleric. So first off, of course, Death Cleric is a cleric, and clerics are just incredibly good at multi-classing, regardless. 1 level in cleric is just one of the best 1-level dips in the game, even ignoring their subclass abilities entirely, giving you medium armor, shield proficiencies, access to guidance, resistance, blade ward, healing word, bless, create water, sanctuary, just a ton of extremely powerful utility just from a single level in a class, and also makes your character significantly more survivable with the defensive abilities that it gives you and the armor and shield proficiencies that you get on characters that don't have them. So lots and lots of characters can benefit from 1 level of cleric just for those abilities at all. Death Cleric gives you some other abilities at first level, because again, this is a Cleric subclass, so it shows up at first level, including martial weapon proficiency, which is pretty nice for some characters, especially spellcasting characters that would be interested in one level of Cleric, and the ability to double target with your necromancy cantrips, as well as select Bone Chill as a spell known. Now, this will use your wisdom, so usually if you want to emphasize this, you are only going to benefit from it on a character that has high wisdom. So this will mostly be multiclassing with a druid, like for example a spore druid. You can use double casted bone chills with the Reaper passive and gain a lot of benefit on a spore druid, even just from the one level of Death Cleric. Now, this potential alone, just doubling your necromancy cantrips on any character that's casting bone chills, combined with the fact that it's on a cleric, so it's just already one of the best one-level dips in the game, would probably be enough to push Death Cleric to S tier all by itself. But of course, we continue to get class features as you level up in the subclass. At level 2, you get Channel Divinity, Touch of Death, which lets you do an extra burst of damage whenever you make a melee attack. Now, at first glance, this looks like a very greedy ability that requires you to level up a lot in Cleric to get the benefits of it. When you first get it, you can only use it once per short rest, and you need to be level 6 until you get to use it twice per short rest, and the damage scales with your Cleric level. But being 2 levels in this basically gives you a level 1 Paladin smite usable 3 times per day. 9 damage from 2 levels of Cleric plus the 5 base damage is the same average damage as a Paladin smite using a level 1 spell. 2d8 damage is the same as 9 damage. So that just adds an extra little bit of burst damage to any character that's making melee attacks or attacking with melee spells, things like Inflict Wounds, which can be very beneficial for, again, a character like a Spore Druid that's constantly making melee attacks and potentially casting melee spells, or any other spellcaster that has a hybrid with melee attacks. You don't have to have huge amounts of damage out of this ability, though of course it does improve as you level it up, because you only use it if that extra 9 damage is going to make the difference between killing an enemy and not killing an enemy. So pretty much every time you activate it, it's going to turn into a dead enemy. The level ups make that happen more frequently, but this ability is still worth using even if you don't invest significantly in it. So you can take a breakpoint at level 2 or level 3 for second level Cleric spells. Pretty much any odd level breakpoint with Death Cleric is always going to be good, because Clerics get additional spell levels at odd levels, so you can get second level Cleric spells for aid and things like that. Level 3 is probably not the best breakpoint, but it's possible. But level 5 gets you Spirit Guardians. Level 6 gets you the ability to ignore resistance to necrotic damage, so makes an excellent breakpoint for any character that's doing a lot of necrotic damage, whether that be a Necromancer Wizard, or again, a Spore Druid, or a Sorcerer that has taken a lot of necrotic spells, which is certainly something that you can do with Sorcerer. There's a lot of different options for how to build this character that synergize very well at various levels. And again, one level of Death Cleric is so strong that just the existence of these other niche builds you don't need much in order to make Death Cleric an amazing class for multiclassing. You do still get more cool options after level 6, though, in addition, of course, to all of the spell levels that you get as you continue to level up. At Cleric level 8, you get Divine Strike Necrotic, which lets all of your attacks do an extra d8 of damage. Now, this does come at the cost of extra attack, because to take 8 levels of Cleric means you can only get 4 levels in another class. So you are never going to be able to get extra attack. So this does decrease your melee power, but if you're building around a character that just wants to make one really strong melee attack, like with a Paladin Smite and Divine Strike, then you can definitely build around that type of character as well. I did a build based on the Dark Justiciar for Shadowheart, and that used higher levels of Death Cleric to focus around doing really strong attacks with Channel Divinity, Touch of Death, and Paladin Smites to do huge amounts of burst damage, and of course you get Divine Strike Necrotic for even more damage. At higher levels of Cleric, you also get all of the normal breakpoints that Cleric has with Death Cleric, At level 11, you can still do all the cool 1-level dips that spellcasters can usually do, like a level of fighter for constitution save proficiency, a level of wizard to gain all the wizard spellcasting, which is even better for Death Cleric because the ability to ignore resistance to necrotic damage is very relevant for a lot of wizard spells, and of course can enable all sorts of shenanigans with the Staff of Cherished Necromancy and stuff like that. Level of Bard or Rogue for skill access. All of those things can be very powerful as well. Or 10 levels of Cleric and 2 levels of Paladin to still get 6th level spell slots while also getting Paladin Smites is another great option as well. So there's a lot of possible breakpoints with a lot of possible synergies. Even though this character doesn't get that many really powerful signpost abilities as you level up, the fact that its first level is so incredibly strong means you can work it into a ton of possible builds, and it gets a lot of interesting options as you continue to level it up. And it's just a cleric, so clerics are just strong enough that they're always going to have really powerful multiclassing options. For all of those reasons, we are going to put Death Cleric into S tier. I don't think that it cracks S+ tier because most of the time when you're multiclassing this character, it's going to be a specific build in mind based around burst damage with its channeled divinity abilities, or just getting the doubled necromancy cantrips on a character that's making normal necromancy spellcasting, though there's a bunch of other more niche options as well, but there's so many cool options and so many of them are powerful. S tier is perfect for Death Cleric. Next up, Star Druid. So Circle of Stars Druid is actually really interesting to talk about for multiclassing because, as I mentioned, Druids typically don't multiclass extremely well. It's a fairly linear class that wants to take a lot of levels in Druid because every level in Druid is so good that you just benefit from taking more levels in Druid. Star Druid, though, because of the unique attributes of this subclass, is actually something of an exception, because its abilities play extremely well with other characters. Since you're not a wild shape focused Druid subclass, you mostly don't have to get enough levels to get the more powerful wild shape forms. Instead, you're focused around your starry form abilities, which come online much earlier and remain relevant much later than the early game wild shape forms. Right away at level 2, we get a bunch of really awesome abilities. So firstly, we get guidance for free. Now you could have taken that just from your first level of Druid, but it does give you some extra utility on cantrips, but mostly you get these Starry Form abilities. There are 3 of them, and all of them have a lot of potential for multiclassing. Starry Form Archer gives you a bonus action to do a d8 plus your wisdom of radiant damage at a 60-foot range, and it's a bonus action once per turn, doesn't cost a resource, lasts all day, so this just gives you a pretty powerful damaging bonus action for a 2-level investment. It's radiant damage, so it's very relevant for any build that's trying to do radiating orb effects, and just makes your character significantly more damaging and more powerful as a ranged combatant. Chalice Form gives you the ability to add an additional cast of healing. It says it's a bonus action here, but that's just to use the wild shape charge. You don't have to use the bonus action to actually activate Chalice Healing. Whenever you cast a healing spell, so if you cast a level 1 or higher healing spell, including, for example, Healing Word, you get Chalice Healing as well activatable for free. This lets you heal 2 creatures with 1 spell or double up on healing, so for any healing-focused character, Chalice Healing is a ton of free value. A lot of characters that want to heal will take 2 levels in Life Cleric to get the Life Cleric abilities. Chalice Form is just as good or better for dedicated healing characters, and gives you an enormous amount of additional value, and of course it only takes a 2-level investment, so you can combine it with levels in Life Cleric to make an extremely capable healer. The real winner, though, and it's interesting that I'm saying that the real winner is the 3rd one, when I've already talked about 2 really powerful abilities for multiclassing, is Dragon Form. Dragon Form gives you the Dazzling Breath ability, which is also a damaging bonus action, so just like Archer Form, makes your character much better at doing bonus action damage, but also gives you effectively reliable talent for concentration saving throws. All of your rolls can be a minimum of 10. This is a unique effect as well, and combines with other sources of improvement to your concentration saves. You can take your first level as Sorcerer, and then 2 levels as Star Druid, have con proficiency and reliable talent for concentration saves. You can get advantage on concentration saves through equipment or other class features, and be basically unable to fail concentration checks. Notably, 2 levels of Star Druid, 1 level of Sorcerer for con saves gives you full casting levels and only takes 3 levels, so you can still have 9 levels of Cleric if you want to concentrate on Spirit Guardians, which is one of the spells you're most likely to lose concentration on. So that gives you a character that basically can't lose concentration on Spirit Guardians and just gets to run around. You can also combine this with a character that's double casting haste, like a Sorcerer character that's using quickened haste, or twinned haste, in order to have that character never lose concentration, or a character that's self-casting haste so that they can constantly concentrate on that without the worry of stunning themselves. You also get 2 free casts of Guiding Bolt at level 2, so what you get at level 2 Star Druid is worth so much to any spellcasting character, especially wisdom-based spellcasters like clerics, or rangers who've invested in wisdom, that already this character has a ton of possible multi-classing options. As you continue to level up, you get even more cool stuff. At level 6, you get Cosmic Omen, which is basically cutting words in the Woe version, or Bardic Inspiration in the Will version, and that's a pretty powerful ability as well. Combined with 6 levels of Druid, which gets you to 3rd level Druid spellcasting, or you can go to level 7 to get 4th level Druid spellcasting and get the really powerful Summon Nature's Ally abilities. Summon Woodland Being. And other awesome Druid 4th level spells like Wall of Fire. There's a lot of great breakpoints for Star Druid. At later levels, you don't need to take Star Druid all the way to level 10, but you can. You get the 3rd Wild Shape attack, so your Druid Wild Shape forms are still really good, even if you're mostly going to be spending your Wild Shape charges on the Starry forms. And you get the ability to use 2 Starry forms in 1 turn. So you can double up on your damage output, or you can use Chalice Healing. So you can use Luminous Arrow and Dazzling Breath in the same turn. You can use Chalice Healing and Dazzling Breath and then stay in Dragon form to maintain concentration. And your abilities, you get passive improvements to those abilities. 10 levels is a pretty nice breakpoint because you can take 2 levels of Paladin, still get 6 level spell slots, and now have smites if you want to be a more melee-oriented character. You can take 11 levels and then 1 level of Wizard in order to get max level Wizard casting. In addition, you can take a level of Cleric for all the reasons that we talked about with Death Cleric, where a 1 level dip is great. So there's a ton of different breakpoints for Star Druid. Often, I think multi-classes with Star Druid are going to stop at level 2 because Dragon form is just so good and so powerful for a lot of more concentration-dependent builds. But there's many different ways that you can build this class. It's very versatile and very powerful when multi-classing. So we're going to give it... Let me swap back to the tier list here. Of course, S tier. Again, I don't think it cracks S plus tier because you are sacrificing real stuff to get these advantages. But Star Druid is still just a really powerful class to multi-class with a ton of great build options. Next up, Arcane Archer. So obviously Arcane Archer is a fighter, and fighters multi-class exceptionally well. I talked about how Battlemaster Fighter is the quintessential S-tier multi-class, which can go in an enormous variety of builds at basically any level split and perform extremely well. So Arcane Archer Fighter already has an extremely high baseline for multi-classing. The question is, what do we get from the subclass itself that makes you more interested in multi-classing into Arcane Archer than a different fighter subclass? Because a lot of fighter multi-classes are just going to stop at fighter level 1 or 2 and not even take a subclass at all. And a lot of them benefit really strongly from the Battlemaster maneuvers or the Eldritch Knight weapon bond or the Eldritch Knight defensive abilities. Arcane Archer hopefully has something unique that draws us to play this class instead of a different fighter. Take a look at the abilities and we'll talk about those. So right at level 3, when we get to take the Arcane Archer subclass, we get 12 uses per day, more if we have a bard and can short rest more frequently, of these arcane shots. You can choose up to 3 of them, so you can emphasize a lot of different things depending on which of these arrows you select. But these abilities give us a ton of different optionality for any archer. Now, of course, Arcane Archer is only going to be used for archery builds, otherwise it doesn't make sense. It's right there in the name. You wouldn't take this character on a non-archery class. You probably could build a couple non-archer Arcane Archer builds, but you'd definitely be doing something weird. So the question is, how good are these arrows compared to, say, 3 levels of Gloomstalker Ranger or 3 levels of Battlemaster Fighter for improving your character? The answer is quite good. Arcane Archer Fighter at level 3 has a lot of great options that give you a significant increase to your power level and let you do things that you just can't do otherwise with an archery character. The first of these, and most important, is Banishing Arrow, which lets you banish an enemy as the level 4 spell or as the level 5 spell Banishing Smite with an archery attack. So for your action at level 3 or half your action once you have extra attack, you can cast a level 4 spell 12 times a day. That's really, really powerful. In addition to that, you get a bunch of other options that can give your character new abilities or make your character significantly more reliable. Seeking and Piercing Arrow can let you do damage without rolling attack rolls and apply a lot of on-hit effects, which is really nice as well. So you can apply on-hit effects from your weapons without rolling attack rolls, which is great. And these other arrows give you a bunch of other great options as well. Blinding an enemy with Shadow Arrow is very powerful. Slowing an enemy with Grasping Arrow and making them take damage is really powerful. Charming an enemy, actually, pretty good as part of a weapon attack because a charmed enemy can't attack you, so you can stay safe, and has some synergy with Glamour Bard. You could potentially even do a build where you Beguiling Arrow an enemy. With 3 levels of Arcane Archer, you shoot them with Beguiling Arrow, and then as your bonus action, command them with no saving throw because they're charmed from the Beguiling Arrow. Probably not the best build, but definitely an option that you have. So these arcane shots, because there's so many options with them, give you a lot of different cool stuff that you can do. Then, of course, you're still a fighter. So if you level up to level 5, you get extra attack. Level to level 6, you get an extra feat. Level to level 7, and you get Curving Shot, which just makes your shots more reliable, and additional arcane arrows and arcane shots, giving you more uses of your abilities per day and more options for your abilities. So it's very, very similar to Battlemaster Fighter in that you can kind of customize it to be what any build needs, provided that build is an archery build. It's certainly less versatile than Battlemaster, which can be for archers or melee characters, but Arcane Archer gives you the same sort of level of customizability within the arena that it lets you, that it gives you. At later levels, you don't get that much, so a lot of Arcane Archer builds are going to stop at level 5, where you get the arrows and extra attack, and a lot of them will stop at level 6 or so in order to get the extra feat. Level 10 just gives you an extra arrow and an extra use of your arcane arrows, which is still pretty good. And of course, fighter level 11 is always an amazing breakpoint because you get your 3rd attack and can now use 3 of these in a turn. But at that point, you're mostly just an arcane archer build all the way through. 1 level of some other classes can be relevant, like a level of War Cleric, but I think a lot of the time when you go to level 11 in Arcane Archer, you're best off just getting another feat and going to level 12, and don't benefit that much from multi-classing 1 more level. So your normal breakpoints are going to be level 3 for just the arrows, or level 5 for the arrows and extra attack. So to sum up, how good do I think Arcane Archer is as part of a fighter build? Very good. I think Arcane Archer does exactly the thing that it's trying to do, works very well with other classes, and can be taken all 12 levels and be very strong, or can be taken 3, 5, 6, 8, 11 levels as part of another archery build and do very well. So A tier for Arcane Archer. Next up, Drunken Master Monk. So when I reviewed these characters for monoclass builds, with single class builds, I said that Drunken Master Monk, there basically wasn't a reason to take it as a single class character. Its abilities are somewhat weak and relatively backloaded, and mostly just superseded by other versions of Monk, which do pretty much exactly the same thing, but better. However, Drunken Master Monk was recently updated in the mini patch, which was a couple days ago at time of recording. So the question is, have those abilities been improved by that mini patch to the point where there's more of a draw to taking this class, or can we find ways to make its abilities synergize with multiclassing to make Drunken Master Monk a little bit more interesting as a multiclass build than as a monoclass build? Let's take a look at the skills and we will see whether that's true. So Obviously, this is a monk subclass, so you need to be at least level 3 before you get access to it, which is definitely a mark against it, because a 3-level investment is a lot bigger than 1 or 2 level investment. It's enormously bigger than a 1 or 2 level investment, because it means that you reach many fewer powerful breakpoints in classes that might potentially multiclass with it. At level 3, we get the ability to regain half our key points. A little more important for a multiclassing character, because key point management can be a little bit more of a challenge if you're trying to multiclass with monk. Proficiency in performance, which doesn't matter, and drunken technique. Now, drunken technique is actually a pretty good ability, but I don't know if it's worth a 3-level investment. The double attack with a bonus action, of course, is very strong, and the 10 foot of movement and disengage is pretty nice for a character that wants to stay mobile. However, you have to compare this to other abilities that you could get that are very similar with a 3-level investment. 3 levels for Open Hand Monk gets you the Open Hand Monk's special flurries, which are way better than a disengage, because they'll knock an enemy prone or away from you, and then you can just leave without having to worry about the disengage. And 3 levels in Thief Rogue gets you effectively a bonus action offhand attack and a bonus action disengage, because you have 2 bonus actions with Thief Rogue. So it does kind of the same thing that Drunken Technique does, but all the time, and has wildly more utility because you get extra bonus actions. So a 3-level investment in Drunken Master Monk doesn't seem that useful. 4 levels gets you Intoxicating Strike, which isn't a real ability, and then 6 levels gets you the newly changed Redirect Attack. This is the first ability where things are a little bit more interesting. The ability to attack back at an enemy is relatively unique. There's a piece of gear that lets you do it, but with 6 levels of Drunken Master, you can get it much earlier. You can build a retaliation character around Redirect Attack and Riposte from Battle Master that only needs 9 levels to get both of those abilities, and be able to attack back against enemies whenever they miss you with melee attacks. So there is one build that we could do, though it is kind of a niche build or a themed or memed build, more than it is a particularly strong build based around Redirect Attack. I'll probably do a build guide to the Retaliation Strike character with Drunken Master Monk at some point soon, assuming they don't change it any further. At later levels, again, we don't really get any meaningful abilities. Life of the Party, I've shown the bug abuse with this, where you can stack it outside of combat to get infinite armor class, and then respec to a different character and just have infinite AC on any character. Sobering Realization requires you to lose Life of the Party and does pitiful damage, and Drunkard's Luck is a fine ability, but certainly not worth taking 11 levels in a character that doesn't really give you much of anything. So, Redirect Attack is by far the most interesting ability that Drunken Master Monk gets for multiclassing builds, and that enables one kind of themed build, but otherwise, there just really isn't a reason to take levels in Drunken Master Monk. Drunken Technique is fine, but duplicated better by other levels and other characters. So Drunken Master Monk, unfortunately, for both solo classing, where I don't recommend taking it, and for multiclassing, we're going to put it in C tier. I would still really like to see more work done on this class to make it a more interesting option. Next up, Oath of the Crown Paladin. So Paladins, of course, multiclass extremely well in general. 1 level of Paladin gets you martial weapon proficiency and heavy armor, as well as lay on hands. 2 levels of Paladin gets you smite and a fighting style. So for any spellcaster, you can take 2 levels of Paladin to suddenly be a devastating melee combatant, as well as have a bunch of passive benefits. 5 levels of Paladin gets you extra attack. 2 levels of Paladin also gets you command cast with charisma. And of course, all the charisma classes multiclass extremely well with one another. You can take pretty much any combination of levels of the 4 charisma classes with each other and end up with a very strong and viable character. So the real question isn't, is Oath of the Crown Paladin good to multiclass with? Because it is, but do we want to take it over other Paladin oaths when we're multiclassing into Paladin? Let's take a look at the abilities and we can see if that's true. So at first level, we get Righteous Clarity. We also get the Oath of the Crown, which uses the same oath breaking as Oath of Devotion. This is actually worth noting because the Oath of Devotion is probably the hardest oath to keep. So you will accidentally break your oath sometimes, especially if you've only taken like 1 or 2 levels in Oath of the Crown Paladin for the mechanics and aren't role-playing as a paladin specifically. So that can be an actual drawback. But the Righteous Clarity ability sure makes up for that. For your bonus action and a Channel Oath charge, you can, for 10 turns, give you or an ally a bonus to your proficiency bonus, so +2 at this level, going up to +4 at later levels, to your attack rolls. That's a huge bonus to your accuracy, and of course works extremely well with a lot of various builds that want to use Paladin. If you are a Great Weapon Master build, then you benefit from, you pretty much offset the attack penalty that Great Weapon Master gives you, so it's just a ton of damage. At level 2, you're going to get the smites, so you get a huge amount of value from one level in Righteous Clarity. Oath of the Crown Paladin is in fact the best Paladin to dip if you're doing only 1 or 2 levels of Paladin, usually 2 levels of Paladin, because Righteous Clarity is such a good ability. It's better than what all 3 other Paladins get at level 1. Proficiency bonus to your attack rolls is just massive. Things continue to be good at higher levels, though. In addition to being an amazing 2-level dip, Oath of the Crown Paladin gets, at level 5, of course, extra attack, but also Warding Bond, which on a character that is intending to be a melee character is a very powerful ability, a very powerful spell to have access to. If you are, for example, a Sorcerer Paladin split, like a 5/7 split, then having Warding Bond to redirect some damage to you can be, from Squish Your Ally, can be very helpful. This character can end up pretty tanky, and Warding Bond, especially in combination with the healing ability that you get at level 3, and other abilities to mitigate or redirect damage, can help keep your party alive. One of the ways that you lose in Honor Mode is if one character gets focused down. So even if you're not abusing Warding Bond by casting it from camp, so all your characters take half damage and then characters back at camp take the other half, casting it just in a party on a character that's pretty tanky is not a bad usage of this character either. Divine Allegiance is more an interesting ability than one that we're specifically looking to incorporate, but again, for a sort of tanky Paladin build, you can combine this with other cool stuff. You could combine it with Bearheart Barbarian Rage to halve the damage that you're doing to yourself. There's a lot of really interesting builds that you can do with Divine Allegiance, so it is less an ability that gives you more power, but more an ability that gives you a lot of really cool builds. And then, of course, Spirit Guardians on a Paladin works very well. By the time you're level 9, you're probably going to go to level 11 to get the extra damage on every attack, but you could also just take 3 levels in Warlock, or for Pact of the Blade Warlock. Less important now that Hexblade exists, but we'll get there in a moment. You could take 1 level in Hexblade Warlock, 2 levels in Fighter, and have Action Surge, Spirit Guardians, and Charisma-based attacks. There's a lot of great level splits that you can do even later on in Oath of the Crown Paladin. But the most common breakpoint is going to be level 2, getting you Smite attacks and Righteous Clarity, or level 5, getting you Smite attacks, extra attack, Righteous Clarity, and also Warding Bond and Spiritual Weapon, which are not bad. Command cast with Charisma, which is very relevant for a lot of characters. So the normal breakpoints are going to be 2, 5, or at much higher levels like 11. Like any Charisma character, you can multi-class with all the other Charisma characters very well, and like any martial character, you can multi-class with the other martial characters very well. Levels in Ranger are a little less useful to you, but still pretty useful, and levels in Fighter or Barbarian both make really interesting characters. Bard, Warlock, Sorcerer are great. Wizard gets you Wizard spellcasting, even with your reduced access to high-level spell slots. That's still a lot of utility that you can have if you take a level of Wizard. A level of Cleric can make you a much more dedicated healer and unlock the support capabilities of this character, or multiple levels of Cleric for Life Cleric. You can even use Star Druid, like we just talked about, to be a more dedicated healer or a more dedicated Radiating Orb build. Another thing that Oath of the Crown Paladin gets is access to Radiating Orb, because you have Spirit Guardians on a Paladin. So a Spirit Guardiansing Paladin with 2 levels of Star Druid suddenly can apply a ton of Radiating Orbs and has great concentration to maintain concentration on Spirit Guardians. So lots and lots of great options with Oath of the Crown Paladin. It's now the best Paladin for 2-level dips, but the hits don't stop there, so of course it's going straight into S tier. Next up, Swarmkeeper Ranger. I'm actually now keeping my own swarm of 1 because my cat has decided he desperately needs to be in my office or he'll explode, so he's here to help with the rest of the recording. Swarmkeeper Ranger, of course, doesn't get any subclass abilities until level 3. and so is in competition with one of the best 3-level dips in the game in the form of Gloomstalker Ranger. Gloomstalker Ranger gives you such an absurd amount of stuff at level 3 with the extra attack and the bonus to your initiative that Swarmkeeper Ranger really needs to do something interesting and powerful to be able to compete. Luckily, Swarmkeeper Ranger, rather than trying to compete on raw numbers the way that Hunter Ranger does, where it mostly just means you take Gloomstalker over Hunter 100% of the time, actually does something pretty different that's a lot more interesting as part of a multiclass. Swarmkeeper Ranger at level 3 gets the option of choosing one of 3 swarms, and those swarms give you, once per turn when you attack an enemy, you can choose one of 3 abilities. 2 of those abilities are shared between all 3 swarms. It's either doing a d6 of damage, the type depends on which swarm, but it's always a d6, or 2d6 if the enemy has Hunter's Mark on them, or teleporting you a short distance. The third ability depends more strongly on which of the swarms you have chosen. If you take the bee swarm, then it will push an enemy. If you take the jellyfish swarm, it will shock an enemy using the shocking grasp ability, so preventing their reactions. And if you take the moth swarm, it will blind an enemy. Usually you're going to want the moth swarm unless you have something very specific in mind with pushing or shocking enemies, or the lightning damage is particularly good for your build because you're doing a lightning themed build. The blind is by far the most powerful of these effects. It's usually going to be better than 2d6 damage as well. So the ability to take 3 levels to have a once per turn blind that just requires you to attack an enemy, doesn't take any other actions, is a pretty powerful multi-classing option. That type of resource-free crowd control is pretty rare in Baldur's Gate 3, so the ability to get access to it with a 3-level investment is very relevant for a lot of builds, and the ability to turn it into just pure damage or mobility if the crowd control is not going to be good is especially nice because it means that this ability is always relevant as long as you're making weapon attacks. So, or as long as you're making attacks at all. Another interesting thing about this is, and that's why when I misspoke and said weapon attacks, it's actually very important that that's not true, is that this ability works pretty much no matter how you make an attack. You can use a spell attack and it works off of a spell attack. You can use an unarmed attack and it works off of an unarmed attack. You can even activate it while wild shaped. It's one of the only ways to increase the damage of your wild shape attacks because the flurry or swarm abilities work when you attack as a wild shape form. A 3-level ranger investment and a 2-level druid investment can get you the spider form, which lets you entangle enemies or now blind them with flurry of moths when you attack. And that's a very powerful crowd controller in the early game. So there's a lot of interesting options that you can do with this subclass that might not appear at first glance. These abilities also use wisdom as your save DC, and that's not bad because a lot of characters just want to increase their wisdom anyways, so you'll usually have decent save DCs on these abilities, and the fact that it happens for free every turn means that it's pretty relevant. Of course, as you continue to level up, at level 5, you get extra attack as a ranger, but after level 5, you mostly don't get any relevant abilities. Both the base ranger class and this subclass don't get any particularly strong abilities between level 5 and level 11. At level 11, your swarms get upgraded, and you can now blind and slow every attack, and that's really nice. But of course, by the time you're level 11, you're just looking at 1-level dips with Ranger. There's a few that you can do here. Obviously, like 1 level of Fighter for an additional fighting style. 1 level of Wizard gets you some Wizard spell casting. 1 level of Rogue gets you a lot more skill access. 1 level of Bard, similarly. There's a couple 1-level dips that are really nice for this character. But mostly, if you're multi-classing with Swarmkeeper Ranger, you're going to be taking either 3 or 5 levels. The question then is, how good is it to take 3 or 5 levels of Swarmkeeper Ranger in order to get these swarm options? And the answer is pretty good. A 3-level investment for a free blind every turn, a lot of builds can use that. There's plenty of builds that don't have anything that they desperately need from their last 3 levels, and adding a free blind to those builds can be pretty nice. This can let you emphasize a more crowd control focused martial character. It can add some free crowd control to a more caster focused character, and it can even work with your wild shape forms in order to be one of the few ways you can improve wild shape attacks and let your wild shaping druid get free crowd control every turn that's also based on wisdom. I'm going to post a build guide to that particular combo to go over that one in more detail, but there's a lot of really cool options that you can do with Swarmkeeper Ranger. For that reason, with Swarmkeeper, we're just going to give it a nice solid A tier. There's not a lot of different level splits, but all of the different multi-class options are cool, and the thing that it gives you is a really nice side grade to a lot of other character builds. Next up, Swashbuckler. So Rogue, of course, is one of the most powerful classes for multiclassing in the game, giving you a huge amount of value for very few levels, in part because the level 3 abilities on the subclasses are generally speaking so powerful. So Thief Rogue or Assassin Rogue are amazing multiclassing options because 3 levels in that gets you a huge variety of abilities, which can go in an enormous variety of builds and make them all significantly stronger. Let's see if Swashbuckler lives up to the same features. So at level 3 with Swashbuckler, of course you've taken 2 levels in Rogue, so you've already gotten your incredible skill access from taking your first level of Rogue, and your bonus action hide, dash, and disengage from taking your second level of Rogue. So your character is significantly more mobile and just a lot safer in terms of where you can position on the battlefield and how you can play the game. So already we've gotten a lot out of this level investment. That makes this 3-level investment less damaging than a lot of the other classes that have to take 3 levels in order to get their subclass. At level 3, you get Fancy Footwork, which lets you make a melee attack against a target and prevent them from making opportunity attacks. So basically you get a free disengage every single time you melee attack. That's pretty nice because it means that you can attack, move away, and then bonus action hide, so you can constantly hide if you're making melee attacks. And you get +2 to your initiative rolls, which scales with your rogue level, but already at level 3, +2 to your initiative is an awesome ability. And you don't need advantage or an ally to trigger sneak attack, so you can just sneak attack all the time without having your allies nearby or advantage. So Rakish Audacity gives you the ability to move around the battlefield a lot more. This is a pretty nice combo for a mobile character in terms of letting you effectively disengage for free every turn, and then also not need an ally nearby and give you +2 initiative. But the problem with that, of course, is that Thief Rogue exists, which lets you have a second bonus action, which you can use on a disengage, so you can bonus action disengage and then hide, so you effectively get a free disengage every turn by taking Thief Rogue, and all the tremendous utility of having a second bonus action. Now, the Rakish Audacity ability does give you something meaningfully different from Thief Rogue, but Fancy Footwork is mostly just worse than the second bonus action. The +2 to initiative is really good, and the ability to sneak attack without an ally nearby is fine. Usually you can manage that positioning, but it does give you a little bit more in the way of optionality. So for 3 levels of Rogue, Swashbuckler gives you some things. Mostly it's going to be outshone by the other 2 Rogue subclasses that are typical 3-level dips in terms of Thief or Assassin. But Swashbuckler gets something unique that the other Rogue subclasses don't get, which is real abilities at level 4. An extremely common level split for Rogue is 4 levels of Rogue and 8 levels of something else, whether that be Fighter, Barbarian, Monk, whatever, because you get a feat at level 4 Rogue. Swashbuckler not only gets that feat and the pretty solid level 3 abilities, it also gets these level 4 abilities, which let you use a bonus action to attack an enemy with your main hand weapon and disarm them if they're armed, or use a do a little bit of damage and blind them with Sand Toss, because do a little bit of damage and blind them if they're not armed. Typically, you're going to want to use Dirty Trick, Flick of the Wrist. I don't know why I was just like stumbling over my words there, my bad. Typically, you're going to want to use Dirty Trick, Flick of the Wrist if the enemy is armed, and Sand Toss if they're not, because Disarm is usually better than Blind, and it does the full damage of your main hand weapon. And then Vicious Mockery can also come up in some multi-classes where you are more charisma-based, so if you're doing a Thief Rogue Hexblade build in order to make your attacks with charisma. If you're doing a Thief Rogue Swashbuckler Rogue Sword Bard build, then the Vicious Mockery as a bonus action is just a nice little bonus to your damage output that makes your bonus actions even better. The one problem with this is that you can't multi-class with Thief Rogue, which would let you use these more than once, but you can use the Helmet of Grit if you have the appropriate item, and use these abilities more than once in a turn. So this is a really solid set of bonus actions, and it sort of gives you extra attack just by taking 4 levels of Rogue, because it lets you turn your bonus action into an attack. And of course, it stacks with normal sources of extra attack. So 4 levels of Swashbuckler Rogue makes a really solid addition to pretty much any martial build. After that, there's not really much reason to continue in Swashbuckler Rogue. Panache is a sort of medium ability, and it requires 5 more rogue levels to get. You can definitely do better with more levels, but that, of course, doesn't matter for multi-classing builds, because you're pretty much interested in what the 8-4 splits look like with Swashbuckler and other classes, and those 8-4 splits are pretty good. I went back and forth a bit on whether I was going to give Swashbuckler Rogue A or B tier, because it's a meaningful side grade to Thief Rogue and Assassin Rogue, but still probably lower on the power level split than those two options for many builds. And of course, there's pretty much only one level breakpoint, which is level 4 for Swashbuckler Rogue, so it does somewhat constrain how you can build the class. But because 4 levels of Swashbuckler works so well with 8 levels in pretty much any combination of other martial characters, I think I am going to give it A tier. It's a little bit on the lower end than Thief Rogue, which is definitely an S tier character, and still a little bit less powerful than Assassin Rogue, which goes in fewer builds, but is very, very powerful in those builds. But Swashbuckler Rogue gives you a lot of cool options with multi-classing, so A tier. Shadow Sorcerer. So Shadow Sorcerer is actually in kind of a funny spot here, because it would be so much more exciting for multi-class builds if it weren't for the next class on this list. Sorcerer builds, of course, or Sorcerer dips, of course, are extremely powerful. 1 level of Sorcerer gets you con save proficiency if you start with it, gets you charisma-based spellcasting, which is awesome, and charisma skills, gets you the shield spell and great cantrips for a default combat option, so there's a lot of great things that you get from 1 level of Sorcerer. But 1 level of Shadow Sorcerer doesn't get really anything in addition to that. Eyes of the Dark is not a particularly meaningful ability, and Strength of the Grave, while it can be nice, is not something that I would ever want to rely on. So for a 1 level dip, you're much better off with Storm Sorcerer, which gets you the incredibly powerful Tempestuous Flight ability and lets you fly as a bonus action, way better than these 2 abilities. So 1 level dips, Shadow Sorcerer isn't where it's at. 3 levels of Shadow Sorcerer, though, that gets a lot more exciting. This is a way to see in the dark with Eyes of the Dark Darkness that doesn't require you to sacrifice caster levels. Normally, to see in the dark in Baldur's Gate 3, to see in Magical Darkness, you need to be at least a level 2 Warlock. And since Warlock casting is different from other spellcasters, it requires you to sacrifice 2 levels of spell progression. That means to get Devil's Sight with at least 2 levels of Warlock, you have to give up at least 6 level spell slots. Shadow Sorcerer fixes that by letting you take 3 levels of Shadow Sorcerer in order to get both Darkness Abuse and maximum level spell casting. So that's pretty powerful. However, only 3 levels of Shadow Sorcerer for that reason does suffer for a couple reasons. You just won't have very many sorcery points, or you're going to be burning a lot of your spell slots to turn into sorcery points in order to use Eyes of the Dark Darkness. Now, of course, you can use infinite sorcery point abuse with potions of angelic reprieve or whatever in order to circumvent this, but assuming that you're not doing that, then the 3-level dip into Shadow Sorcerer, you're only going to be able to use this ability a pretty limited number of times per day. Now, it's still a very powerful ability, and Darkness isn't good in every fight, so you only need it a couple times per day in order for it to be excellent. But it's not as spammable as it would be if you were playing Warlock instead. The other issue with the 3-level dip for Darkness with Shadow Magic is that the Eversight Ring exists, Arrows of Darkness exist, Scrolls of Darkness exist, so putting 3 levels into Shadow Magic Sorcerer and sacrificing the things that you would get from Storm Sorcerer or just more levels in whatever other class you were considering is a pretty steep price to pay for something that you can get instead from items and other pretty readily accessible abilities. Now, obviously, Darkness is extremely powerful, so it can still be worth it, But this is a real cost and not usable as often as you might like for something that you're spending a pretty heavy investment into, and that you could get through a lot of other means. So in order to want this 3-level dip, you would need the rest of your party to have those items accounted for whatever reason, not to want levels in Warlock, usually because you want to be a full spellcaster who still gets 6-level spell slots. But a lot of the time you could just take the 3 levels in Warlock and use 5th-level spell slots and be just as effective. And then also have Eldritch Blast and Agonizing Blast and stuff like that, rather than the Sorcerer levels. So there's a pretty narrow subset of characters that actually benefit from a 3-level dip in Shadow Sorcerer. Higher level splits with Shadow Sorcerer also don't make that much sense to me. 6 levels for Nimbus is not bad, but Nimbus doesn't continue to scale throughout the game. So if you take 6 levels, then you have a great summon when you get it, and then a summon that stays kind of relevant throughout the rest of the game, but certainly isn't going to be like amazing on into the end game. And Shadow Walk is obviously a great ability, but by that point you might as well just be playing a monoclass Shadow Sorcerer, which of course is an amazing thing to be. None of these objections apply to monoclass Shadow Sorcerer, which is just awesome because it's a fully powered sorcerer that gets to use darkness abilities, which is incredible. So if you're just playing monoclass characters, Shadow Sorcerer is amazing. What that means when you put it all together, though, is that Shadow Sorcerer as a multi-class character doesn't have much of a home. It's an awesome character for monoclassing, but once you've decided to invest in Shadow Sorcerer and just be a darkness-themed sorcerer, you really are better off just taking more levels in Shadow Sorcerer. So you can use this ability more often, so you can use Hound of Ill-Omen, so you can use Shadow Walk. All of these are great abilities, and you just don't really need other things, because Sorcerer as a base class is so powerful. For that reason, we are actually going to give Shadow Sorcerer, just like Glamour Bard, B tier. Not because these are bad classes, but because what you get from them is something that you want to continue getting. So you would much prefer to just take more levels in this class than use it as part of a multi-class build in most cases. Next up, Hexblade Warlock. And honestly, I don't think we really need to spend too much time on Hexblade Warlock. I've talked about this one pretty extensively, and I mean, just by glancing at the level 1 abilities, you can probably see where this one's going to end up. At level 1, you get more class features from Hexblade Warlock than some entire subclasses give you over all 12 levels. You get medium armor, shield, and martial weapon proficiency, the best proficiencies in the game, and you get to use your charisma modifier to attack with your weapons, so you get to tie all of your abilities to a single stat. You also, of course, get all the great Warlock stuff that you get at level 1, and especially Eldritch Blast and your Warlock spell slots, and you get the ability to cast Hexblade's Curse as a bonus action, adding your proficiency bonus in damage to every single damage instance that you do. So for like a magic missile build, that adds to every one of the missiles. For a Scorching Ray build, that adds to every one of the rays, and reducing the number you need to critically hit. In addition to all of that, you get the shield spell, which is something that we often want to 1-level dip in Wizard or Sorcerer for. Really powerful defensive ability. And a bunch of other like great Warlock spells. Wrathful Smite a little bit less important, but shield and then all of these things at first level, that would be enough to push this class into S+ tier all by itself. It's just way too much for 1 level in a class to give you. I've talked extensively about how good this class is as a 1-level dip. It's now the 1 level of Hexblade Warlock is now the single best level in the game. Just in terms of the sheer amount of stuff that it gives you. Pretty much any character can benefit from taking 1 level of Hexblade Warlock if you're making any sort of attack rolls, or doing any kind of damage with the character, then Hexblade Warlock 1 or 2 level dip just makes the character vastly stronger. Then, of course, things don't stop there. At level 2, you get Devil Sight and Agonizing Blast. At level 3, you get Darkness. At level 5, you get extra attack with Pact of the Blade, and on Tactician mode or below, that will stack with other sources of extra attack, so you can get 3 attacks in a turn. And you get Hunger of Hadar, because you're a 5th level Warlock. At 6th level, you get the ability to summon creatures as a reaction. And all the way up to level 10, you continue to get great stuff. So you can use Hexblade Warlock from any level split, from 1 level of it for an incredible bonus to 12 levels of it, and stop at pretty much any level in between, and you will have gotten an amazing set of features out of the build. Hexblade Warlock just gives you a ridiculous amount of stuff. I thought about trying to list, some possible builds with it or what characters have specific synergy with it, but the answer is every class and every class combination in the game is awesome with Hexblade Warlock, because this character just gives you so much for so little investment that a 1 level dip more or less improves any build, and multiple levels in it will still just vastly improve a lot of builds. So Hexblade Warlock, of course, going straight to S plus tier. We all saw this coming. It's just so much for 1 level of a class, or even more levels. And finally, Bladesinging Wizard. So Bladesinging Wizard is an interesting case, because a lot of Wizard multi-class builds are just going to take 1 level of Wizard to get access to all the Wizard spellcasting, because of how Wizard spellcasting works in Baldur's Gate 3, where you can learn spells from a scroll based on your caster level, and only need 1 level of Wizard to enable that ability. Bladesinging Wizard means that you can do that and then take a 2nd level of Wizard to get access to the subclass abilities, which is often pretty good for a Wizard build. Usually for a 2-level dip with Wizard, you're going to be taking Divination or Evocation if you're if you really want the ability to drop fireballs on your allies' heads without harming them, like you're a Sorcerer Wizard mix, for example, and you find your allies in harm's way a lot. But usually Divination is going to be the normal 2-level dip. Bladesong Wizard gives you a really interesting alternative to that, because you get full Wizard spellcasting, and then also this very martial-focused ability that can help any unarmored caster just be a lot more resilient, or add additional armor class to a more martial-focused build. Bladesong you can activate twice per long rest when you get it at level 2, and it gives you your proficiency bonus to armor class, which is a pretty big boost to your armor class, and 10 feet of movement speed, which stacks with other sources of additional movement speed, as well as your proficiency bonus to your saving throws, which again stacks with actual con save proficiency, so you can be very, very good at not failing constitution saves. If that sounds familiar, it probably is, because it's sort of similar to Star Druid, where you can stack this ability with other sources of things that want you to maintain concentration on spells, and things that help you do that to be really, really good at concentrating on Spirit Guardians or Haste or whatever. Spirit Guardians is especially cool with this, because you get the extra movement speed to apply it more frequently. Now, this does have some pretty severe restrictions. You can't be wearing medium or heavy armor or shields, which is a pretty severe restriction, and you have to be wielding a sword in your main hand. Now, you only have to be wielding a sword in your main hand. If you have dual wielder, you can have a staff in your offhand for the full Gandalf build. And there's obviously some swords that are really nice to wield in your main hand, even for casters, most notably Falar Luv, but there's still some others that are really good. Bladesong Wizards, or a character with a couple Bladesong levels, makes an ideal Falar carrier, because you get the additional movement speed to bring it close to enemies, and then also it fulfills the requirement that you be holding a sword. The bonus armor class and move speed mostly don't make up for not being able to use a shield, but if your character wasn't planning to use a shield anyway, armor or a shield anyways, then this is a pretty significant buff to your armor class. So 2 levels of Bladesong Wizard can be very helpful for a lot of more lightly armored spellcasters. You also get Bladesong Climax, which you can build up by making weapon attacks if you're doing that, or casting spells, and then do a burst of healing or damage as a bonus action, which is pretty relevant, especially if your character is up in the mix, hitting things. And this is all in addition to just being wizard, so you get full wizard spellcasting if you're a character that gets casting. For example, a 10-2 split with Swords Bard gets you 6th level wizard spells, and this full all the Swords Bard stuff, and also the Bladesong. If you take more levels, then you get extra uses of Bladesong, which is quite nice, because if you're reliant on this ability, you definitely want to be able to use it more than twice per day. That is one of the main downsides of an only 2-level dip into Bladesong Wizard, is that the number of uses of Bladesong you get is pretty limited. And then at level 6, you get extra attack. Extra attack on a full spellcaster is ridiculous for all sorts of reasons, so just being a wizard with extra attack means that you multiclass incredibly well with Paladin, you multiclass incredibly well with Hexblade, you multiclass incredibly well with any character that wants to both make attacks and cast spells. 6 levels of Cleric with 6 levels of Wizard gets you full Wizard spellcasting. You could do Death Domain Cleric burst damage from your Channel Divinity, in addition to having extra attack and full Wizard spellcasting with a 6/6 split. So there's a lot of really awesome things you can do with 6 levels of Bladesong Wizard. So the normal level splits are going to be level 2 or level 6. Either you just want the Bladesong and the Wizard spellcasting, and then you'll take 2 levels, or level 6, you want the extra attack as well as the ability to cast Counterspell. The other relevant thing about going to level 6, which I didn't mention, is that you can't learn Counterspell from a scroll, but if you level all the way to level 6, you get to learn it just by leveling up in Wizard. So you can have full 12th level spellcasting, extra attack, and Counterspell with a 6/6 split with this and another spellcaster. At level 10, you also get Song of Defense, which does make you tankier, and that can be combined again with 2 levels in any other spellcasting class, or even just 1 level in any other spellcasting class, but 2 levels of Paladin with level 10 Song of Defense gives you 6 level spell slots and smite attacks, extra attack, all the benefits of being a wizard, counterspell, and so on. As well as weapon and armor proficiencies from Paladin that you can't really use because they conflict with your Bladesong, but you might find that you just prefer to be in heavy armor and just play a heavy armor wizard with extra attack and counterspell and smites and just ignore activating Bladesong, because one of the great things about Bladesong Wizard is you don't even have to use Bladesong at all. Just getting extra attack on a full spellcaster, specifically on a wizard who's really, really whose spellcasting is so good that having extra attack just gives you a whole extra variety of options, is really nice. So there's a lot of builds you can do that just ignore the Bladesong entirely and just run around in heavy armor with as a full spellcaster with extra attack. Bladesong Wizard multiclasses extremely well. There's tons of different options, whether you're taking Paladin levels for smites, whether you're using this to boost another more lightly armored spellcaster. Any of those options are extremely strong, so we are going to give Bladesong Wizard S tier because it multiclasses extraordinarily well. Alright my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the multiclassing potential of the new patch 8 subclasses, and I hope it helps you plan how you're going to approach building these characters, whether as monoclass characters or as multiclasses, and what builds you're going to do. I think patch 8 is just around the corner, so hopefully we can all be trying out these builds very, very soon. And I hope that this gives you some great ideas for how to do that. This is a really interesting exercise because where they ended up in the tier list is actually not very reflective of the overall power level of the subclasses. Of course, it has something to do with it, but mostly this is how well they play with others. So I would say that when you're reviewing this tier list, don't spend too much mental energy on which specific tier the classes went into. The most important part is talking about the breakpoints and interesting skills that they have, interesting abilities they have, and how they synergize with other possible builds. And of course, if there's something that you think I missed, or you think I put one of these in the wrong tier because I'm not understanding how an ability interacts with something else, definitely do let me know in the comments. I'm always open to moving things around, though again with this one, this tier list is very much just a jumping off point. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit the like button. Helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides. I'm going to be diving more deeply into each of these subclasses when patch 8 actually launches, so you can look out for that, and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.